The night Harlow Sinclair Osi walked into the Fairmont's Grand Ballroom on the arm of Edmund Voss, Nadia Brennan Osi felt the floor tilt beneath her. Not because she was surprised. She had known, in the way you know things you're not supposed to know. A credit card statement here, a perfume on a collar there, a phone angled just slightly away when it buzzed past midnight. She had known for nearly 8 months. What she hadn't known was that her husband would choose tonight, of all nights, to stop hiding it. Tonight was the opening gala for the Meridian Tower. The 42-story mixed-use development that Nadia had spent 3 years of her life designing. 3 years of late nights and arguments with structural engineers and materials sourcing nightmares, and 2 cancelled vacations and 1 miscarriage that she had grieved mostly alone because her husband had been in Vancouver that week on business. 3 years of work that now bore Edmund's name on the press release, his firm's logo on the banner above the entrance, and his face in the brochure that rested on every chair. She had told herself it didn't matter. That was the arrangement they'd made when she joined Voss Architecture Group 6 years ago. She designed, he led, and together they built something. She believed that once, the way you believe in things when you're 29 and in love, and certain that being chosen by someone like Edmund Voss means something. She was 38 now, and she understood things differently. Nadia stood near the east window with a glass of sparkling water she hadn't touched, and watched Harlow Walsh cross the marble floor in a gown that probably cost more than Nadia's first car. Harlow was 26, which Nadia had calculated without really meaning to. She worked in marketing, Edmund's firm, of course, because that was how these things always went. She had the kind of beauty that read as uncomplicated from a distance and only revealed its calculation up close. Edmund caught Nadia's eye from across the room. For a fraction of a second, something moved across his face. Not guilt. She had stopped expecting that. Something more like assessment, the way he looked at a building he was about to acquire, calculating structural weaknesses. Then Harlow said something, and he looked away, and Nadia turned back to the window. "Miss Brennan." She turned. The man standing beside her was tall, with the kind of stillness that made people pay attention. He was perhaps 50, maybe less, with dark hair starting to silver at the temples and eyes that were doing what she recognized as careful listening rather than mere looking. He was holding a glass of wine he also hadn't touched. "It's Brennan Osi," she said. "Or it was. I haven't decided yet." He extended a hand. "Fletcher Okafor. I'm sorry to interrupt." "You didn't interrupt anything. I was just looking at the tower." He turned to the window with her. Outside, the Meridian Tower rose above the Vancouver skyline, lit from within, its curved glass facade catching the last of the November light. It was extraordinary. Even now, even tonight, it took her breath away. "You designed it," Fletcher said. It wasn't a question. "Edmund Voss designed it," she said carefully, "according to the brochure." Fletcher was quiet for a moment. "I've been in this industry for 22 years. I know what Edmund Voss designs. And I know what this is." He paused. "I've been trying to meet you for 6 months. Your assistant keeps telling me you're unavailable." "I've been busy." "I know. I watched you build that building." He nodded toward the tower. "I've also been watching Voss Architecture Circle, a bankruptcy filing, for the last 4 months. Which Edmund hasn't told you." Nadia went very still. "He's been using the firm's operating capital to fund a private holding company," Fletcher continued, his voice low and precise. "The holding company owns several properties, none of which are in the firm's name, none of which you would have claim to in a dissolution." She said nothing for a long moment. Then, "Why are you telling me this?" "Because my development group is planning 3 projects in the next 18 months, and I need an architect." He paused again. "And because I think you already knew something was wrong, and I think you deserve to know exactly what." Nadia looked at him. She had met a lot of men in her career who claimed to be offering her something, while angling for something else entirely. She had learned to read the difference, the way you learn to read load-bearing walls. Not by looking at what's visible, but by understanding what's holding everything else up. Fletcher Okafor looked back at her steadily. "I have a meeting at 9 tomorrow," he said, "if you'd like to know more." He set a card on the windowsill beside her glass and walked away. Nadia didn't pick up the card, not yet. She tucked the name away and turned back to the room. Across the ballroom, Edmund was laughing at something Harlow had said. He had one hand resting on the small of her back. He was wearing the watch Nadia had bought him for their 5th anniversary. A Patek Philippe that had taken her 3 months of project bonuses to afford. She remembered wrapping it herself, and how he had opened it with the particular expression he wore when he was pleased but didn't want to show too much. She wondered when she had stopped noticing that expression and started simply logging it, the way you log a detail you might need later. She picked up the card. The firm had been called Brennan Ossie Design when she started it. A one-room studio above a dry cleaner on Granville Street with a drafting table she'd bought secondhand and a laptop with a cracked hinge. She'd been 26. She had one completed project to her name, a community library in Burnaby that had won a regional design award and gotten her a write-up in Canadian Architect. That write-up was what Edmund had read. He'd called her office, her one-room studio above the dry cleaner, and invited her to coffee at a restaurant she'd heard of but never been to. He was 41 at the time, recently divorced, the founder of one of Vancouver's most established architecture firms. He told her he'd been looking for someone with her instincts for years. She'd thought he meant professionally, which he did. But he also meant the other thing, and it turned out those two meanings were not as separate as she had once believed they should be. By the time she understood that she had walked into something more complicated than a job offer, she was already inside it. And inside it wasn't all bad. She was designing projects she'd never have accessed otherwise, working at a scale that would have taken her another decade to reach on her own. She loved the work. She was good at it. That part was real. What wasn't real, it turned out, was nearly everything else. She signed a partnership agreement in the 3rd year. Her lawyer at the time, a pleasant man who had also done their wills and their condo purchase, had flagged one clause about intellectual property assignment that seemed overly broad, but Edmund had explained it was standard boilerplate, and she had been busy and tired and pregnant, and she had signed. She wasn't pregnant anymore by the time the papers came back. She didn't let herself think about that too often. She just kept designing. The meeting with Fletcher Okafor lasted 3 hours, and at the end of it, Nadia understood the full shape of what had been built around her without her knowledge. Edmund had begun establishing the private holding company, Voss Capital Partners, registered in Alberta, approximately 2 years after she joined the firm. The company held 5 properties, 2 in Whistler, 1 in the Okanagan, and 2 in Calgary. The combined value, by Fletcher's estimation, was somewhere north of $12 million. None of this was hidden from regulators. It was only hidden from her. He used firm revenue, Fletcher said. He was sitting across from her in a conference room with a view of False Creek. There were documents on the table between them, property registrations, bank statements, a corporate registry printout. He had laid them out methodically, without drama, as though he were presenting a construction report, billing clients at standard rates, then routing a percentage of each engagement through a consulting invoice to an entity that exists only to receive the transfer, the IP clause, Nadia said. In the partnership agreement, Fletcher nodded. It assigns all design work produced within the firm to Voss Architecture Group, which means the Meridian Tower, all the awards it will generate, all the licensing potential from the building system you developed for the curtain wall. All of that belongs to the firm, and the firm is about to become Edmund's alone, structured in a way that leaves you with a minority stake worth approximately what you could sell your office chair for. She looked at the documents for a long time. When he files, she said, "What does the timeline look like?" "My estimate is 4 to 6 months. He's waiting until the Meridian Gala press cycle finishes. He wants the profile boost before the restructuring, because he's planning to relaunch under a new entity. Voss Design Studio, already incorporated. Harlow Walsh is listed as a director." Nadia exhaled slowly through her nose. She looked out at False Creek. A seaplane was coming in low over the water. "There's something he doesn't know," she said. Fletcher waited. "The curtain wall system, the building management integration, the sustainable load distribution model I developed for Meridian." She turned back from the window. "I filed provisional patents on all of it 18 months ago. In my name. Personal capacity, not through the firm." For the first time since she'd met him, something moved across Fletcher's face that she thought might be surprise. "My original lawyer," she said, "the one Edmund liked. He flagged that clause. I went to a different lawyer after. She was more thorough. Fletcher was quiet for a moment. Then, the IP assignment clause wouldn't cover individually patented technology. No, Nadia said. It wouldn't. He looked at her across the table with an expression that was careful and, she thought, genuinely respectful. Miss Brennan-Ossie, he said, I think we have quite a bit to talk about. What followed was not a single dramatic moment. It was 4 months of very careful, very quiet work. She hired Renata Clark, a family and commercial law specialist at a firm in Yaletown that Edmund had never used. Renata had a reputation for taking complicated corporate matrimonial cases and emerging on the other side with everything accounted for. She also had the specific quality Nadia most needed right now. She did not speculate, she did not reassure, and she did not waste time. He's going to say you consented to the IP assignment, Renata said at their second meeting. His argument will be that you understood the clause and signed freely. I signed under a particular set of pressures, Nadia said. Pressures you can document? I was 11 weeks pregnant when I signed. We had just had a conversation about whether I would scale back my role after the baby. Edmund had suggested that my value to the firm going forward would be different, more advisory. The signing happened 6 days after that conversation. Renata wrote something down without looking up. And the pregnancy? Ended at 14 weeks, 6 days after I signed. Renata looked up then. Nadia held her gaze. I'm sorry, Renata said. Thank you. What I need to know is whether it's relevant. It establishes context for the state of mind under which you signed. It's relevant. Renata set her pen down. You should also know that the coercion argument is strengthened considerably by the financial misconduct. He was defrauding the firm at the time you signed. If he was already diverting assets, then presenting himself as offering a genuine partnership in good faith, that's a different picture. Can we prove the diversion started before I signed? The first transfer to Voss Capital Partners, Renata said, was 14 months before your partnership agreement. Nadia looked at the table. 14 months. She'd been with Edmund for 2 years by then. They had just moved in together. She thought about the apartment on the 28th floor of a building in Cole Harbor. The morning light through the kitchen window. The way she had thought, standing in that kitchen making coffee, that she was building something. She thought she knew what she was building. Okay, she said, let's build a case. The board meeting was scheduled for a Thursday in March. It was a project review, ostensibly a standard quarterly presentation to the firm's 4 senior partners and 3 external investors, one of whom was a representative of the pension fund that held a minority stake in the firm. What Edmund did not know was that Fletcher Okafor had, 4 weeks prior, acquired that pension fund's minority stake. He also did not know that Nadia would be presenting at the board meeting. Edmund had sent the agenda himself and had not included her name. She arrived 12 minutes early and took a seat at the far end of the table. Edmund arrived at 7 minutes past the hour, mid-sentence with one of the senior partners. He stopped when he saw her. His face did not go pale, exactly. It rearranged itself. All the confident ease he wore in professional settings suddenly recalibrated, assessing. Nadia, he said, I wasn't aware you were on the agenda. I added myself, she said pleasantly. I hope that's all right. She watched him clock Fletcher Okafor at the other end of the table. She watched him compute the significance of this without yet understanding it fully. Of course, Edmund said. He sat down. Nadia waited until the preliminary items were dispensed with. Then she stood and connected her laptop to the display. She presented the building management integration system first. A 20-minute technical overview that she had designed specifically for this room, for this audience, including the 2 investors who she knew had engineering backgrounds. She walked through the load distribution model. She explained the curtain wall system's energy reduction statistics, which had already attracted interest from 2 commercial developers in Toronto. She explained the patent filings. She explained what they meant. Edmund interrupted once, at the 11-minute mark. The partnership agreement assigns all developed technology to the firm, he said. These filings would be subject to that assignment. They would be, Nadia agreed. If the technology had been developed within the scope of my firm employment, these were developed on weekends, using personal equipment, and the provisional filings were submitted under my personal capacity. Before the partnership agreement was signed. She looked at him. You're welcome to review the dates. She watched him look at the dates on the screen. She continued. At the end of the presentation, Fletcher spoke. He was precise and brief. He outlined what Voss Capital Partners was, what it held, and where the transfer records showed the capital had originated. He noted that he had provided this information to the Ontario Securities Commission and to the BC Financial Services Authority 3 weeks prior, and that those investigations were now ongoing. The room went very quiet. Edmund said, "These are serious allegations that require—" "They're not allegations," Fletcher said. "They're registered documents." One of the senior partners, a woman named Harriet Colson, who had been with the firm for 19 years, set down her pen and looked at Edmund for a long moment without speaking. Then she looked at Nadia. Then she looked back at the table in front of her, and something in her expression said that she was doing a calculation she had perhaps been avoiding for some time. After the meeting in the corridor, Edmund found Nadia at the elevator. "You want to tell me what this was?" he said. His voice was quiet, controlled. He was good at control. "This was a board presentation," she said. The elevator arrived. She stepped in. "Nadia, I'll have Renata Clark's contact information sent to your legal team," she said. "They'll want to get in touch sooner rather than later." The elevator doors closed. She did not cry. She had thought she might, and she had been mildly dreading it. Not because tears were weakness, but because she was tired of processing things alone in small spaces. But she stood in the descending elevator, with her presentation folder under her arm, and felt, more than anything, clear. The months that followed were procedural. That's what nobody tells you about the end of a marriage and a professional partnership simultaneously. So much of it is just paperwork. Edmund's lawyers opened by contesting the patent filings. Renata had expected this and had prepared accordingly. The documentation of personal time, personal equipment, and pre-agreement dates was airtight. After 8 weeks, his lawyers stopped contesting the patents. The financial misconduct investigation moved more slowly, as these things do, but it moved. Harlow Walsh resigned from Voss Architecture Group in April. Nadia learned this not from Edmund, but from a former colleague who mentioned it in passing, which was exactly how Nadia had decided she preferred to learn things about that particular situation. The colleague also mentioned, though Nadia hadn't asked, that Harlow had apparently believed she was going to be offered a different kind of role going forward. A partner role, practically speaking, and that when the restructuring plans collapsed in the wake of the board meeting, that offer had quietly ceased to exist. Nadia did not feel sorry for her. She didn't feel glad about it either particularly. She just noted it and moved on. The dissolution of the partnership was finalized in June. The IP assignment clause was voided as part of the settlement. Edmund's lawyers had ultimately agreed to this under protest, because the alternative was continuing litigation on the financial misconduct question, and Edmund's lawyers were smart enough to recognize a calculation that didn't work in their favor. Nadia received a payment. She also received, by separate agreement negotiated by Renata with characteristic efficiency, formal attribution credit on the Meridian Tower, her name, her firm, on the permanent project record. It wasn't everything. There were things she would never recover, time, mostly, and a particular kind of optimism about people that she'd had in her late 20s, and which now lived somewhere she couldn't fully access. She didn't spend a lot of energy grieving that. You could spend your whole life grieving the shape you used to have, or you could just get on with the shape you were now. She got on with it. In September, Nadia Brennan-Ossie opened the doors of Brennan-Ossie Design Studio on the 6th floor of a building in Gastown. Not above a dry cleaner this time, though she'd thought about that first studio with a kind of private affection. The way you think about a smaller version of yourself that you'd outgrown but still recognized. The studio had 12 people in it by October. It had 15 by December, when they signed their first contract with Fletcher Okafor's development group. A 40-story residential tower in Burnaby, the first of 3 projects, with the curtain wall integration system and the load distribution model both specified as baseline requirements. At the signing, Fletcher shook her hand and said, "I should tell you that I'm not in the habit of getting involved in other people's professional difficulties." "I know," she said. "You told me you'd been trying to meet me for 6 months. That's true, but I could have waited until the situation resolved itself." "Why didn't you?" He considered this. Because I've watched a lot of things collapse that didn't need to, and I've watched a lot of people stand in front of those things collapsing and tell themselves there's nothing to be done. He paused. You weren't doing that. You were already doing something. You just needed to know what you were dealing with. She thought about the card on the windowsill at the Fairmont. She thought about picking it up. I knew what I was dealing with, she said. I just needed someone to say it out loud. He smiled at that, and they went back to the blueprints. The Burnaby Tower would take 3 years to complete. She knew exactly what 3 years of that kind of work looked like. She'd lived it already, in a different city version of herself, with different people around her. She also knew something she hadn't known the first time. She knew what it felt like to come out the other side. What she was building now was hers. Properly, legally, entirely hers. She spread the blueprints across the table and got to work.